Well, let's continue the conversation and reach out now to the Federal Minister for Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson. Minister, thank you for joining us this evening.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
Now, the Alberta Premier, she's been talking about her opposition to the 2035 net zero target for electricity for quite some time. She's even funded a national ad campaign against it. So are you at all surprised that they would trigger the Sovereignty Act over the issue?
Well, yes, I am surprised, to be honest with you. We set up a working group with Alberta to actually work our way through some of the thornier issues that exist between us, and certainly one of the big areas of focus was the clean electricity reg. That working group has now met 5 times, 4 of which were actually focused on the clean electricity regulation, and that working group has actually made enormous progress. There's been good conversations. I think we both understand each other better, and some of the concerns that Alberta has, I think, are being addressed as we think our way through that. So I was very surprised because the Premier nor her folks gave us any indication that they were thinking about doing that. And in fact, from my perspective, it looked like we were moving closer together towards consensus than previously we had been.
Okay, it's interesting you say that because we just spoke with an Alberta minister and we heard it from Danielle Smith today. Part of the reason why they say they are enacting the Sovereignty Act is because they believe, despite these discussions, acknowledging that there are things that Ottawa and Edmonton have come together on, they say that when it comes to clean electricity, you're not hearing them. And that's the reason why they are enacting this, because they want to be very clear about their message that they cannot meet the 2035 target. So what do you say to their concerns that you're not listening enough?
Well, I would just say I think it's unfortunate that they would say that because I don't really think that's true. They keep talking about a 2035 deadline. And while Canada and all G7 countries have an aspirational commitment to a net zero grid by 2035, we all, including the United States Environmental Protection Agency and their regulations, have put in place flexibilities within that allow for some areas where we know there is going to be a need for flexibility to avoid things like stranded assets. And so in the current draft of our clean electricity reg, it provides that if you build a natural gas power plant in 2023, anytime up before the end of 2025, you can run that plant unabated without carbon capture for 20 years. That's 2044, 2045. And Premier Smith says she wants to be net zero by 2050. So it's not that big a gap. And so that was what we were working to try to close. So when they say that we're not listening to them, I just say that's not true. There were several areas that we have focused on at the table where I think we have learned things. They have learned things. We have been coming together. And at the end of the day, I think this is ultimately a victory of partisan politics over good public policy, which is, in my mind, a real shame.
Partisan politics. So you don't think that this is actually based on anything more than that?
I think that there are some differences between us, and we had been working in good faith to try to close those. Look, we did the same thing with Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, which both have challenges with respect to getting to a clean grid. And what we did was they had 2 premiers who had the courage to stand up and say, okay, let's work together to try to figure this out. And we signed agreements with both Nova Scotia and New Brunswick saying that the federal government will work with each of those provinces to ensure that we can actually get to a point where this is workable. It's workable in terms of a grid that's reliable. It's workable in terms of a grid that's affordable, but it's also workable in the context of it being non-emitting. That's important for fighting climate change, but it's also important for building the economy of the future. Like industrial activity is going to be, and future industrial activity is going to require access to clean energy. And so it is in Alberta's interest to move in this direction. They know that. And I just say this is a victory of partisan politics and silly political games. Rather than good public policy where, you sit down in a room and you actually try to figure out solutions instead of throwing sticks across the table.
Okay, to be clear, these clean electricity regulations, they've not yet been passed. They're still at the proposal level, but already we're hearing Premier Smith call your regulations unconstitutional, electricity primarily within provincial jurisdiction. Is your government overstepping here?
No, I've heard Premier Smith say that. Look, I used to be a constitutional negotiator, actually, for the province of Saskatchewan. And so I'm reasonably familiar with the Constitution. I would say that under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, it's pretty well-established law that the federal government has the ability to regulate in this area. And there is no constitutional power that a province has to simply ignore areas that are within federal jurisdiction. So, no, I don't think this is a constitutional issue. I think this is actually an issue of good public policy. And, I think thoughtful leaders will find pathways to achieve outcomes that will actually recognize the constraints that a province like Alberta is under, but also a pathway to move forward. And, look, the working group is going to continue. We're not walking away from the working group. We think it's been enormously productive. We want to work with Alberta. We want to find pathways to agreement rather than actually having arguments. And I look forward continuing to try to find those pathways. As I say, I think we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a ways to go.
Okay, so is there then an official response? Will there be an official response to the invocation of the Sovereignty Act, or will Ottawa just ignore it?
Well, my response is, at the end of the day, we recognize electricity is an important issue, and we need to be trying to find pathways to work together. And so my focus is on doubling down on trying to find those solutions and those pathways and leaving aside some of these other conversations.
Okay. Well, Minister Wilkinson, I appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
All right. Thank you very much.